has to be the victim. Now the passive-aggressive side, the other type of men, we tend to get defensive and protective, and we isolate. So we get passive, accepting the idea that we'll never be enough. We're victims in life. We just try to cover our rear ends and make it through. So we abdicate responsibility and abandon relationships. We isolate. Great danger among men. Men who are overwhelmed tend to isolate, move away from everybody else. They don't want anybody to know how overwhelmed they are, right? So under the water, they're paddling like crazy, but they're trying to make it look calm on top. So you ask them, how you doing? I'm fine, things are good. Or it's even worse, I'm blessed, brother. Right. Well, my blessings are killing me. I don't know about you. Okay. So all of that stuff's going on. And it's interesting because men who isolate are in great danger of moral failure. In fact, I have a theory. You know, I was listing the other day men I know who are pastors of large churches that have fallen in immorality. Either with a secretary or another woman in the church or some friend or a prostitute or pornography or homosexuality. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I have a personal theory. It's anecdotal. I think they do it on purpose. I think they want to get caught. I think it's their only way out. Now, you guys may not connect to that, but let me just tell you, when 3,000 people all want a piece of you, and you cannot go to Fred Meyer without somebody stopping you and wanting to talk about their spiritual life or their family, and no matter how ratty you look or what hat you wear or sunglasses you put on, you're constantly on duty. I'm telling you, there comes a time when you just say, I don't want to see another person. Your wife says, hey, let's go spend time with your best friend and his wife. And you say, no, I've had it. I'm exhausted. And so you isolate. And before long, you get that place you just want it to stop. And here's the problem. If you resign or go somewhere else as a church leader, and they love you, they're always inviting you back to do men's conferences and stuff. They're saying to you, oh, we hate to see you go. We're so sorry. But you know what? If you run off with a secretary, you don't get a single call from anybody asking you to do a men's conference. So that's my theory. I think it's because men are overwhelmed and they focus here and not here. Is any of this connecting with any of you? The end result of that, I mean, those are things that happen in us. But let me just say that the third idea here is that the world then gets a distorted picture of Christians and the gospel in the church. Because when they look at men in the church, they see men who are fighting because they think they're right, trying to be in control, or protecting themselves. So for a man in the world looking on at us, yeah?
What was 2B and C? I missed those.
2B and C. B was, we abdicate responsibility and abandon relationships. And ultimately, we're driven by fear.
Thank you.
Notice that's the commonality here. The world gets a distorted picture of Christians. Church is boring. It's a waste of time. And it doesn't really make a difference. Compared to the way the world does work, church doesn't accomplish anything. It's another place where I have to hang out with people I don't know and don't like. The world tends to look at a church either for a place where they can be entertained or a place where their own narrow-mindedness can be validated, rather than a community of growing people. The world looks on, and Christianity they think is for weak or addicted men. Needy people who need a crutch. The gospel is too simplistic, that's number C, or letter C, for the pace, demands, and expectations of real life. Christianity doesn't work. The world is too complex. Issues are too complicated, right? Christian life is just not that attractive to men in the world because they look at men who are compromised, whose lives are just as stressed out as theirs. Often I think a man goes to church and what he needs more than anything is the grace to avoid the performance-drivenness in life. And yet what we do is we rope them into another performance-based kind of community where you've got to hit this step and behave this way and that way. Now, hopefully here at Change Point, you feel the culture. We're trying to build a culture that isn't like that. Because once the church is not offering grace, the church has got nothing to offer. The last thing I need is another performance-based environment. Christianity just doesn't work for real men. It's all a result of the fact that we're not in control. So focusing here, or here, that compromises our testimony, it robs us of life of vitality, it undermines our ability to believe. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, over history, there have been great examples of men who've taken a different track. Rodney Stark, in his book, The Rise of Christianity, one of the great books of all time. Stark is a secularist. He's not even a Christian. And what he's doing is studying historically, why did Christianity replace the paganism of the Hellenistic and Roman world? Because remember, paganism, that is multiple gods, it had existed and been the primary spirituality for generations. So obviously, it provided something that allowed people to have a view of self and purpose and work toward opportunities and responsibilities. Somehow it supported that system. But it had one great weakness. See, the Roman Empire in the 2nd, 3rd century was the world power. There was no military, no power that could threaten the Roman Empire. The only thing that could threaten the Roman Empire, and did threaten it, was epidemic. And in 260 AD, two epidemic events occurred in the Roman Empire that put it on its knees. And Stark argues that it was the way the Christians responded to that toppled paganism over. Because paganism had no answer to suffering and heartache and dying. So listen to what Dionysius, there's a letter written by Dionysius, who was a follower of Christ at the time. It's Stark references and quotes. Dionysius writes this: most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ, and with them departed this life serenely happy, for they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. Many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their death to themselves and died in their stead. The best of our brothers lost their lives in this manner. A number of presbyters, deacons, and laymen, winning high commendation, so that death in this form, the result of great piety and strong faith, seems in every way equal to martyrdom. But the heathen behaved in the opposite way. At the first onset of the disease, they pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads before they were dead, and treated unburied corpses as dirt, hoping thereby to avert the spread of the contagion of the fatal disease. But do what they might, they found it difficult to escape. Paganism gave no motivation to care for the sick and dying. Roman families threw their sick relatives out onto the street and ran to protect themselves. followers of Christ stayed right in the middle of Rome and cared for those who were dying, even though it cost them their lives. Now, if you're focused on your responsibilities and opportunities, you never do that. If your focus is your purpose in life, that's certainly not consistent with a purpose in life. Unless you just happen to be, drawn to the needs of the physically ill. There are exceptions, I'm sure, but self, no protection of self there. That came from an understanding of the gospel. And it toppled what had been the number one spiritual idolatry in the world for hundreds of years. Interesting, huh? Well, today around your tables, I want you to look at a biblical case study. I've given you some questions related to John the Baptist. The text you're going to be looking at is in John chapter 3, verses 22 through 30. And there's a description here about John the Baptist's response when his disciples challenged him to look at responsibilities and opportunities, think of purpose and self. What was happening here in this story was the disciples came to John, and basically they're saying, John, the one you baptized is now baptizing people, and he's getting more converts than you are. And John's response is remarkable. It leads to the statement where John looks at his disciples and says, points to Jesus and says, he must increase and I must decrease. And really the question I wanted you to get to today is what causes a man to get there? Where he can look at others around him and say, they must increase and I must decrease. He can look at Christ and say, he must increase and I must decrease. That is so counterintuitive to men. What is it that got John the Baptist there? And just to tease you a little bit, I want you to remember that in Matthew 11, Jesus makes this statement about John the Baptist. He says, no one born of woman is greater than John the Baptist. Now that's a remarkable statement. How would you like Jesus to say that about you? There's never been anyone born of woman that is greater than Christ. So I'm giving you some questions for around the table, interacting with John the Baptist, and next time we get together, we'll talk a little bit about what you've learned from studying John, okay? Okay, John chapter 3, verses 22 through 30.